Captain Jake's hands gripped the controls tightly as the warning lights flashed across the dashboard of his spacecraft. His ship was shaking violently, a deep rumble echoing through the metal walls. The sudden turbulence threw him off balance, and his breath quickened. "Come on, hold together," he muttered to himself, trying to steady the ship. His heart raced as the ship's sensors beeped wildly, showing a massive storm ahead, far worse than anything he had encountered before. "Warning, collision imminent." The computer's robotic voice blared. The systems began to fail one by one. First the lights, then the navigation, then the engine. The spacecraft was out of control, and there was nothing Jake could do to stop it. He slammed his hand against the emergency controls, trying to steer the ship manually. But it was no use. With a loud crash, the ship collided with something hard, sending Jake flying forward in his seat. His head struck the dashboard, and everything went black. When Jake opened his eyes, the first thing he noticed was the burning pain in his forehead. He reached up, feeling the sticky wetness of blood. Slowly, he sat up and looked around, but everything seemed strange. He was no longer inside his ship. In fact, there was no sign of it at all. The ground beneath him was soft and covered in strange, glowing plants that seemed to hum with energy. The sky above was a swirling mixture of colors, not like anything he had seen on Earth. It was almost as if the sky itself was alive. Panic began to rise within him. Where am I? What happened to the ship? He tried to stand but stumbled, his legs weak from the crash. His head throbbed, and he took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "Focus, Jake. You need to get out of here." He looked around for any signs of civilization, but all he could see were these strange glowing plants, and in the distance, what looked like large rock formations. There was no sign of life, no other people, just the eerie silence of this unknown place. As he stood up, a noise broke through the quiet, soft whispers, almost like the wind, but with a rhythm to it. Turning toward the sound, he saw movement. Figures, several shapes moving between the trees in the distance. He squinted, trying to get a clearer look, but they were too far away. His heart began to race again. Could they be hostile? He had no weapons, no way to defend himself. He had no idea where he was or what kind of creatures lived here. Jake took a few cautious steps forward, and as he did, the figures grew clearer. They were humanoid, but different, taller than humans, with long, flowing hair and bright, colorful skin that shimmered in the light. They moved gracefully, like they were part of the landscape itself. The figures were coming closer now, and Jake froze, unsure what to do. He considered running, but the aliens were already too close. One of them, a tall female with glowing silver eyes, stopped in front of him. She studied him with an unreadable expression, her head tilting slightly as if trying to figure him out. Jake stood still, trying to appear calm, even though his heart was racing. "Hello," he said, his voice rough from the crash and the shock of everything happening so quickly. The alien girl didn't speak right away. Instead, she raised her hand and motioned for the others to stop. The others, 3 more alien girls, gathered around, all of them watching him carefully. Jake felt like an insect under a magnifying glass, their eyes examining every inch of him. He could feel the tension in the air. Then the girl in front of him spoke, her voice surprisingly soft but commanding. "You are not like us," she said in a language that was foreign, but somehow Jake could understand it. It was like their words translated directly in his mind. Jake blinked in surprise. "I'm human," he said slowly. "I crashed here. My ship." "Your ship is gone," the girl interrupted, her voice sharp. "You are lucky to be alive." Jake's stomach twisted. The reality of his situation began to sink in. His ship was destroyed, and he had no way of getting home. And these beings, whoever they were the only hope for survival. He had to figure out how to communicate with them, gain their trust, and maybe, just maybe, find a way back to his world. "I'm not a threat," Jake said, trying to sound as non-threatening as possible. "I just need help. Please." The girl's glowing silver eyes narrowed slightly, as if she was weighing his words. The other girls whispered among themselves, but Jake couldn't understand their language. He felt helpless, stuck in a world he didn't understand, surrounded by creatures who seemed both beautiful and dangerous at the same time. After what felt like an eternity, the girl spoke again. "We will take you to our home. But remember this, human. Men are rare here. We do not know what to make of you." Jake nodded quickly, not wanting to make things worse. "I understand." With that, the girl turned and motioned for the others to follow her. Jake, unsure of what to expect next, followed them into the strange world that was now his only chance at survival. The alien girl's world. Jake followed the alien girls through the strange, glowing forest. The trees here were unlike anything he had ever seen before, tall, with thick, twisted trunks that seemed to pulse with light. The air was cool and smelled sweet, like flowers and fresh rain. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, considering everything that had happened. He couldn't help but stare at the alien girls around him. They were taller than him, their bodies graceful and fluid, as if they moved with the wind. Their skin shimmered in different colors, blues, purples, and even golds. They had long hair that flowed like liquid, and their eyes glowed in the dim light, each one different from the next. But it was their gaze that made Jake feel uncomfortable. They were all studying him, watching his every move. The girl who had spoken to him earlier, the one with silver eyes, led the group. Her name was Lyra, as she had introduced herself, though Jake didn't quite understand the full meaning of the name. Her voice was soft, but when she spoke, it was clear she had authority. She didn't say much as they walked, and Jake felt an awkward silence between them. He wanted to ask questions about where he was, how to get back to his ship, and most importantly, if he was safe, but he didn't want to make things worse. The group continued walking through the forest for what felt like hours. The ground was soft beneath his feet, and he occasionally had to step over strange plants with bright, glowing leaves. He kept his eyes on Lyra, who moved ahead with purpose, leading him deeper into the heart of this alien world. Finally, the group reached a clearing, and Jake's breath caught in his throat. Before him stood a massive structure, unlike anything on Earth. It was a city, but it wasn't built with bricks or stone like human cities. The buildings seemed to be made from the very land itself, twisted and shaped into perfect, smooth forms. Some of the buildings were towering spires, others were wide and round, with walls that looked like they were grown rather than built. The entire city shimmered with light, casting a soft glow across the clearing. Jake's eyes widened as he took in the sight. This was unlike any place he had ever imagined. "This is our home," Lyra said, her voice breaking the silence. She turned to look at Jake, her eyes studying him carefully. "We call it Vela. It is a place for the girls, our people." Jake's heart skipped a beat. It was beautiful, but it also looked empty. Where were the others? The whole city seemed deserted, and Jake began to wonder if this place was always this quiet. As they walked into the heart of the city, Jake began to notice more details. There were more alien girls now, all of them stopping to watch him as he passed. Some smiled, others stared with curiosity, but none of them spoke. It was clear that he was a rare sight here, maybe even an oddity. They entered a large central building made of a smooth, shiny material that seemed to reflect everything around it. Inside, the air was cool and soft music filled the room, though Jake couldn't tell where it was coming from. The interior was just as impressive as the outside, with walls that glowed faintly in hues of purple and blue. Lyra led him to the center of the room, where a large stone circle lay on the floor. It looked like a platform of some sort, but Jake wasn't sure what it was for. "Sit," Lyra instructed, motioning to the platform. Jake hesitated but did as she said, sitting down cross-legged on the cool surface. The other girls gathered around him. standing at a distance but still watching him closely. "I know you have many questions," Lyra said after a long pause. "But we are not like you. Our world is different." Jake nodded. He couldn't wait any longer. "Where am I? What is this place? And why are there only women here?" He felt his heart race as he finally let the question spill out. He had to know. Lyra's eyes softened, and she sat down across from him, her posture elegant. "This is Vela, our home. It has always been a place for us, the girls. We live here in peace, and men are not part of our world." Jake blinked. "But I'm a man. How is that possible? What do you mean by not part of your world?" Lyra sighed, her silver eyes dimming slightly as she looked down. "Long ago, men lived with us. But something happened, something we do not speak of often. Since then, we have been alone." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know what had happened, but it was clear that the alien girls held some kind of deep, painful memory. He opened his mouth to ask more, but Lyra raised her hand. "I do not want to talk about it," she said softly. "Not yet. It is too painful for us." Jake nodded, understanding that it was a topic better left untouched, for now. "Okay, but why did you bring me here? Why not just leave me where I landed?" Lyra looked at him for a long moment. "Because you are different. We have seen men before, but you are unlike anything we've known. Your presence here, it changes things. Our world has been quiet for so long, and maybe it is time for something new." Jake felt a strange weight on his chest. Was he the key to their future? Could he really help them in some way? He wasn't sure, but one thing was clear. This was just the beginning of something much bigger than he could have imagined. The strange rule about men. Jake sat cross-legged on the stone platform, surrounded by the alien girls. The silence in the room was thick, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was being left unsaid. He glanced at Lyra, who still watched him with those glowing silver eyes. There was a tension in the air, a sense of something hidden, waiting to be revealed. "So you said men haven't been part of your world for a long time," Jake said, trying to break the silence. "Why is that? What happened to them?" Lyra's gaze shifted for a moment, as if unsure whether to answer. She looked at the other girls, who were standing silently, their eyes fixed on Jake. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than before. "It is a rule," Lyra began, her tone serious. "A rule that was made long ago. Men, we cannot be with men. It is not allowed." Jake frowned, confused. "But why? What's wrong with men?" Lyra hesitated, glancing at the others again. The girls seemed to share the same troubled expression, as though they had heard this question countless times, but never found a good way to explain it. "It's not that there's something wrong with men," Lyra continued slowly. "It's just that, when the men were here before, they were different. They wanted things from us that we could not give. They changed our world." Jake listened closely, trying to understand. "Changed your world? How?" Lyra's eyes darkened as she looked away. "Long ago, we lived peacefully with men. But then, something happened. The men grew too powerful, too demanding. They took more than we could give. They made rules that were not our own. In the end, they left us, and we were left alone, but broken." Jake felt the weight of her words. He could see that this was not just a simple rule. It was tied to pain, to something deep in their history. Whatever had happened, it had scared them. And now, men were a part of that scar, a reminder of a time they no longer wanted to remember. Do you know what happened to the men?" Jake asked softly. He wasn't sure if it was the right question to ask, but he had to know. Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with sorrow. "They left. Some went to other planets. Some disappeared. We do not know for sure. What matters now is that our world is ours again. The rule about men was made to protect us. It keeps us safe." Jake opened his mouth to speak, but Lyra held up her hand, stopping him. "We cannot change the rule. It is sacred to us," she said firmly. "It's the reason we live without men now. It keeps our world in balance." Jake thought about what she said. The rule made sense in some ways. If the men had caused so much pain in the past, it would be natural for them to want to keep their world safe. But what about him? He was here now, and he wasn't going anywhere. Could he change their minds? "I understand. I think," Jake said, though he still felt a sense of confusion. He had never heard of a world where men and women couldn't live together, especially one so isolated. But there was something in the way Lyra spoke that made him realize how serious this was to them. "But I'm not like the men you're talking about. I'm different. I didn't come here to hurt you or take anything from you." Lyra's gaze softened, and she nodded slowly. "I know," she said, her voice a little quieter. "I can see that. You are not like the others." Jake felt a strange sense of relief. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but at least he had made it clear he meant no harm. "I'm just trying to survive," Jake said. "I crashed here. I don't know how to get back to my ship, or if I even can. I need help. I'm not a threat." Lyra looked at him for a moment, her eyes searching his face as if trying to find something he wasn't showing. After a long silence, she finally spoke again. "You may not be a threat, but you are still a man," she said, her voice still soft but filled with authority. "And that is something we cannot ignore. You are here, and that changes things." Jake's heart raced. What did she mean by that? Could he change the rule? Was it possible for them to accept him, or was he destined to live alone in this strange world with no way to go back? "What happens now?" he asked. He wasn't sure if he was ready for whatever was coming, but he had to know. Lyra took a deep breath, her expression thoughtful. "Now we must follow the rule. We will take care of you. We will make sure you survive here, but you cannot stay among us, not as you are." Jake's stomach dropped. He had heard the words, but he couldn't quite believe them. "What do you mean? I thought you were going to help me." "We will help," Lyra said, "but you must be changed. If you want to stay here, you must be more than just a man." Jake was confused. Changed? How? Lyra's eyes glimmered, and for the first time, a small, mysterious smile played on her lips. "That is something you will learn soon enough. But remember, human, the rule is not just about us. It is about you too." The room grew silent once again. Jake felt a growing sense of uncertainty. What kind of change was she talking about? And more importantly, could he really live by their rules? He wasn't sure what was coming next, but he knew one thing. He was about to face a choice that would change everything. Growing closer to Lyra. The days passed slowly for Jake as he settled into life on Vela. The alien girls had given him food and shelter, and though the air was tense with the strange rule about men, he had found a place for himself. He was not fully accepted, but he wasn't being rejected either. The girls treated him with a kind of careful distance, as if they were watching him closely, unsure of how to handle his presence. But there was one person who seemed different. Lyra. Jake had noticed that she was always around. She didn't speak much, but she was always nearby, watching him with those silver eyes of hers. At first, he had thought she was just another authority figure in this strange place, but now he wasn't so sure. There was something about her that intrigued him, something that made him want to understand her more. One evening, after the sun had set and the glowing lights of the city came to life, Jake found himself walking through the peaceful forest, alone. The stars above were unlike anything he had ever seen. They shone brighter, and the constellations were all wrong. He had no idea where he was, but the night felt oddly comforting. As he walked, he heard soft footsteps behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "Lyra," he said, his voice quiet but certain. She stepped up beside him, her long, flowing hair glowing faintly in the moonlight. She didn't speak at first, only walked beside him, her presence calm and steady. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound being the soft rustle of the trees and the distant calls of strange creatures. "I never thought I'd be walking through an alien forest," Jake finally said, breaking the silence. "Back on Earth, I had never even dreamed of something like this." Lyra glanced at him, her silver eyes narrowing slightly. "Your world, Earth, it is different, but it is not as peaceful as ours. I can see it in you. You are always thinking, always moving." Jake smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in it. "Yeah, I guess I am. But you're right. Earth isn't peaceful. There's always something going on. People fighting, wars, problems. I used to just try to escape it all, even before I crashed here." Lyra nodded, her gaze turning ahead as they continued walking. "It is different here. We do not fight. We live quietly, with no need for conflict. We do not want what you have." Jake stopped walking for a moment, turning to face her. He had heard her say that before, but it was the first time he really understood what she meant. "You don't want any of it. Not the technology, or the power, or—" Lyra's expression softened, almost wistful. "No, we have learned that power does not bring peace. It only brings pain. The things you want, Jake, we do not need." Jake was silent for a moment, digesting her words. She was so sure of herself, so calm in a way that made him feel unsettled. Here he was, someone from a world full of noise and struggle, and here she was, part of a society that seemed to have everything under control. The contrast between their worlds was enough to make his head spin. "I guess I could learn a lot from you," Jake said, his voice thoughtful. He didn't know why he said it, but the words just came out. There was something about Lyra, something about the way she looked at the world, that made him want to understand her more. Lyra glanced at him, her silver eyes glinting. "You think so?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, you've lived a whole different life. You've seen things I can't even imagine. You're not like the others." Lyra stopped walking and turned to face him fully. Her gaze was intense, and Jake suddenly realized how close they had gotten. The air around them seemed to shift, as if the world had slowed down just for a moment. "I am not like the others," Lyra said quietly. "But that does not mean I am different in the way you think. I am complicated, Jake, just as you are." Jake felt his heart beat faster. He wasn't sure what it was about Lyra that made him feel this way. Maybe it was her confidence, or the way she seemed to understand him without needing to say much. Maybe it was the way her presence made him feel calm, even though everything around him was so foreign and strange. "I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about all this," Jake admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything's changing so fast, and I don't know where I fit in." Lyra studied him for a long moment, her silver eyes never leaving his. "You do not need to fit in. You just need to be yourself. That is all anyone can ever ask." Jake smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Maybe he didn't need to figure everything out right away. Maybe he just needed to focus on being himself, no matter how strange things got. As the night air grew cooler, Lyra stepped closer to him, her presence warm and comforting. For a moment, Jake forgot about the strange rule, the history that haunted these people, and the fact that he was the only man on this entire planet. In that moment, all that mattered was the quiet connection that seemed to grow between them. "You will learn to understand us, Jake," Lyra said softly. "In time, you will see why we do the things we do, why we live this way." Jake nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over him. He didn't know what the future held, but he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe there was a way for him to fit into this world, even if it meant facing the rules, the changes, and the uncertainties that lay ahead. As they stood together in the alien night, Jake realized that Lyra wasn't just an alien leader. She was something more, a guide, a mystery, and maybe even a friend. He wasn't sure where this was going, But he knew one thing for sure. Things were changing between them, and he couldn't wait to see where it would lead. The tension builds. The days on Vela were getting harder for Jake. The more he spent time with Lyra, the more he felt like he was caught in a web of rules, expectations, and unspoken feelings. He didn't fully understand the alien culture, but it was clear that things weren't as simple as they seemed. Despite the kindness the girls showed him, despite the peaceful life they lived, Jake could feel the tension building. It was in the way the girls watched him when he wasn't looking, in the way their voices softened when they spoke of men. The rule, the one about men not being allowed in their society, felt like a wall he couldn't climb. Every day, he saw the distance between him and the girls grow a little larger. They treated him with respect, but there was always a line they would never cross. It was a line he didn't know how to get past. The worst part, Lyra seemed to be struggling with it too. Jake spent most of his time training, learning how to adapt to life on this strange planet. He had no choice but to do what the girls told him. Learn their ways, their survival tactics, their language. Lyra taught him, often in long, quiet sessions under the stars. But each time they were alone, there was this strange, heavy feeling between them. It was as if something was about to happen, but neither of them knew what. One evening after a long day of training, Jake and Lyra sat outside the village. The sky was dark, but the soft glow from the city gave everything an otherworldly shine. The air was cool, and the soft rustling of the trees filled the silence between them. Jake couldn't take the quiet anymore. "Lyra," he said, his voice breaking the silence, "I need to know something. I need to understand this rule, the one about men." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. She had known this question would come, but she hadn't expected it to come so soon. "You still do not understand?" she asked, her voice soft, almost sad. I don't get it," Jake admitted. "Why can't I just be a part of your world? Why can't I be around you, without all these rules?" Lyra's expression softened, but her eyes were still troubled. She looked away for a moment, as though searching for the right words. When she spoke, it was clear she was choosing each word carefully. "It is not easy to explain, Jake," she said quietly. "The rule is not just about you. It is about everything we've been through. It is a way of protecting us. Men brought destruction once before, and now we live with the consequences. It is the way things must be." Jake felt a knot form in his chest. "So, that's it. I'm just a part of what happened before. That's why I'm not allowed to stay." Lyra was silent for a long moment, her silver eyes focused on the distant stars. "It's not that simple. It's not just the men themselves, but the things they brought. The power, the chaos. We have lived without them for so long. We have learned to live with peace." Jake couldn't help but feel frustrated. He wasn't like the men from the past. He wasn't here to bring chaos. He wasn't here to destroy anything. But how could he make Lyra see that? How could he make her believe he was different? "I'm not them, Lyra," he said, his voice filled with urgency. "I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to cause chaos. I just want to be part of something good." Lyra's gaze softened, but she still looked conflicted. "I know you do, Jake. But the past, it is hard to forget. The pain is too much. We cannot let ourselves be like we were before." Jake stood up, frustration boiling inside him. "I get it. I understand. You don't trust me. You think I'm just like them." Lyra stood quickly, catching his arm before he could walk away. "That's not it," she said, her voice sharp but soft, full of emotion. "It's not about you. It's about what you represent. The past. The danger. We've worked too hard to get where we are. I can't just ignore everything we've been through. I can't let you in. Not like that." Jake looked at her, his heart pounding. There was so much pain in her voice, so much fear. But what he couldn't understand was why she was pulling away from him now, when it felt like they were growing closer every day. "You don't have to pull away from me," Jake said quietly, his words hanging in the air. "I'm not here to hurt you." Lyra's expression wavered. For a moment, it seemed like she was going to say something, to reach out, to let him in. But then the walls came back. The wall between him and her, between him and all of them. "I don't know what to do," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what to think anymore." Jake turned away, his frustration rising again. "I don't either," he muttered, but deep down, he knew this tension between them couldn't last forever. Something had to give. Either they would break the rules and face the consequences, or they would both lose the chance at something more. As he walked away from Lyra, the weight of the situation hung over him. He didn't know how much longer he could stay in this strange, tense world. He didn't know if the rule would ever change, or if he would be forced to leave. But one thing was clear. The tension was building, and it was only a matter of time before something would break. A big danger. The days after the tension between Jake and Lyra only grew worse. He could feel it in the air. Something was wrong. It wasn't just the distance between them, or the unspoken words they both refused to say. It was something else. Something dangerous. The village, once peaceful, had begun to feel tense. The alien girls, who had always treated Jake with a polite distance, now looked at him with unease. There were whispers. Jake wasn't sure what they were saying, but the fear in their eyes was clear. Something had changed. Jake had never been one to shy away from danger. But here, on this strange planet, everything felt like a threat he couldn't see. As much as he tried to learn and fit in, there was always that undercurrent of fear, the fear that one wrong move could destroy everything. Lyra, who had been his closest guide and ally, seemed distant. She still taught him the language, still helped him understand the customs, but there was no warmth in her eyes anymore. Every time he tried to talk to her, she would pull away, leaving him alone with his thoughts and growing worries. It was late one evening when the danger finally came. Jake had been out in the fields, helping to gather supplies for the village. The sun was setting, painting the sky with vibrant colors. He had been working quietly, his thoughts heavy with everything he had learned about the alien girls, their customs, and the rules that kept them from fully accepting him. Then he heard it, the scream. A loud, high-pitched cry echoed through the trees, cutting through the peaceful evening. Jake's heart raced. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it wasn't normal. He turned and saw the girls running from the trees, their faces full of panic. Lyra was among them, her silver eyes wide with fear. "Jake," she shouted, rushing toward him. "Get to the village, quickly." Before he could ask what was happening, Lyra grabbed his arm and pulled him along. The other girls were already heading in the same direction, their pace frantic. "Lyra, what's going on?" Jake asked, trying to keep up with her. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. "There is danger." Lyra's voice was strained, her fear clear. "The Volrath are coming." "Volrath?" Jake asked, confused. "Who are they?" Lyra didn't answer at first. Her face was pale, and her eyes darted nervously as they ran. Jake had never seen her so afraid before. Whatever the Volrath were, they were a real threat. "They are a tribe from the northern mountains," Lyra finally explained as they reached the edge of the village. "They have not attacked in many years, but now they are coming for us." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "Why?" Lyra looked at him, her eyes full of worry. "Because they want to take the men. They think if they capture one, they will have the power to destroy us." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "Wait, they want me." Lyra nodded, her grip tightening on his arm. "Yes, you are. You are the one they want. They believe that having you will give them strength, that you are the key to controlling us." Jake was stunned. He hadn't expected anything like this, but the fear in Lyra's eyes told him everything he needed to know. These Volrath weren't just some group of hostile invaders. They were a serious threat, and they were coming straight for him. The village had already started to prepare for battle. The girls gathered their weapons, shiny, sharp spears and swords that gleamed in the fading sunlight. They moved with practiced precision, setting up defensive positions around the perimeter of the village. Jake had no experience with fighting. He was a pilot, not a soldier, but there was no time to think. The danger was real, and he was the target. Lyra pulled Jake into the center of the village, where the other girls had begun to form a circle around him. "Stay here," she commanded, her voice firm. "Do not leave this spot. If you do, they will find you." Jake nodded, though he felt useless. He wasn't a warrior. He couldn't defend himself or anyone else. But as he looked around, he saw the determination in the alien girls' faces. They weren't afraid. They were prepared. For a moment, everything was still. The village was quiet, and the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. Then, in the distance, Jake heard it, the unmistakable sound of marching feet. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them. The Volrath were coming. Lyra's face hardened. She turned to the girls and began giving orders in their language. Jake didn't understand everything, but it was clear that they were making their final preparations. They were ready. Suddenly, the ground trembled. The Volrath had arrived. A massive group of men, all covered in dark armor and carrying heavy weapons, appeared at the edge of the village. They looked rough, angry, desperate, and dangerous. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. These weren't the peaceful, kind people he had gotten to know. These were invaders, ready to take what they wanted by force. The alien girls didn't back down. They stood their ground, forming a strong line of defense. They didn't flinch as the Volrath advanced. Lyra turned to Jake, her eyes serious. "Stay here, Jake. No matter what happens, stay here." Jake watched as she moved to join the others. The tension in the air was thick, and Jake knew something big was coming. The Volrath had come for him, and he didn't know if anyone would be able to stop them. A new future. The battle with the Volrath was over, but the scars it left behind would never fade. Jake stood in the middle of the village, his mind still racing. The danger had passed, but the world around him felt different. The girls were changing. He could see it in their eyes. They had fought hard, and they had won. But at what cost? Lyra was standing by the edge of the village, looking out at the mountains where the Volrath had come from. Her face was tired, but there was something else there. Something new. Jake could see it. Something had shifted between them during the battle. They had fought side by side, and it had changed everything. Jake walked over to her, his footsteps soft on the ground. She didn't look at him at first. Her eyes were focused on the horizon, her mind far away. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. But he knew he couldn't just stand there in silence. "You did it," Jake said quietly, his voice full of admiration. "You stopped them." Lyra turned to him, her silver eyes meeting his. She nodded slowly, but there was no smile on her face. "We did it together," she said softly. "But it was not easy. The Volrath will come again. We must be ready." Jake understood what she meant. This battle had been won, but the war wasn't over. There would always be new threats, new dangers. The Volrath weren't the only ones who wanted to control this world. He could see it now. This planet, these people, had a long way to go before they could truly be safe. "I'll stay," Jake said, surprising even himself. The words just slipped out, but they felt right. "I'll stay here, with you, with all of you." Lyra's eyes softened. She stepped closer to him, her gaze searching his face. "You will stay?" she asked, almost as if she were testing him. "Even after everything?" Jake nodded firmly. "I don't belong anywhere else. I've seen what this place is, what it could be. I want to help. I want to fight alongside you, protect this world, and be part of it." Lyra looked at him, her face unreadable for a long moment. Then, without a word, she reached out and took his hand. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. In that moment, Jake knew that things had changed. The walls between them were crumbling, piece by piece. "I'm glad you're here," Lyra said quietly. "But this is not a simple life. You will face challenges you cannot even imagine. There is much to learn, much to adapt to." "I'm ready," Jake replied. "I've already seen the worst. I'm not afraid." Lyra's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "We will need you, Jake. More than you know." They stood together in silence for a few moments, looking out at the village. The girls were rebuilding, repairing the damage from the battle. Some were tending to the wounded, others were making plans for the future. The village was alive again, but there was a new energy in the air, one that came from surviving something as terrifying as the Volrath. Jake had never imagined his life would end up like this. He had crash-landed on this strange world, with no hope of returning home. He had been lost, alone, with no clear path ahead. But now, as he stood beside Lyra, he realized something. This place, these people, had become his future. He wasn't just a visitor anymore. He was part of their world. The next few days were filled with work. Jake helped the girls rebuild their homes, and he trained with them, learning how to defend the village. But there was more than just physical work to do. There were also talks, meetings with the leaders of the village, where plans were made for what to do next. Jake sat in on many of these, listening carefully, offering his thoughts when he could. He had knowledge from Earth, knowledge about technology, weapons, and tactics that the girls didn't have. But it wasn't just about fighting. It was about building something better. Jake could see the potential for change here. If the girls were willing to trust him, he could help them create a future where they didn't have to live in fear, where they didn't have to rely on their past mistakes. Lyra was always close by. They'd worked together, side by side, as the village began to change. And as time passed, Jake could feel the connection between them growing stronger. There were still moments of tension, moments when the past would resurface in their conversations, but they worked through it. They were learning to trust each other, step by step. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lyra and Jake stood at the edge of the village. The battle had been won, but there was still so much to do. Jake felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was a part of this world, and he had to help protect it. "We've come a long way," Jake said, his voice low. "But there's still a long road ahead." Lyra nodded, her eyes focused on the horizon. "Yes, but together, we can build a new future." Jake smiled. Together. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Jake and Lyra stood side by side, knowing that the future, while uncertain, held endless possibilities. They had survived the worst, but now they had a chance to create something better, something worth fighting for. And for the first time since he crash-landed on Vela, Jake felt like he had found a place to call home.